Something went seriously sideways at the Breakfast Club, and now Claressa Shields is right in the middle of the fallout. What started as a conversation quickly turned into a heated media controversy, with people questioning who was really being defended and who was actually being held accountable. And once Ariel Helwani enters the picture, this story gets even more interesting. So let's break down what happened, because there's a lot more going on here than what first meets the eye. Claressa Shields is currently training in Atlanta for the 15th of August fight against Kaye Scott. For many fans, Scott is still a relatively unknown name in boxing, which has already sparked plenty of discussion. She has limited experience in the sport and also works as a model, making the matchup especially interesting considering Claressa's reputation and her status as one of boxing's biggest stars. Now, people are questioning why this particular opponent was chosen for a fighter who has repeatedly called herself the greatest of all time. And instead of keeping the focus on the 15th of August fight, promoting the matchup, or talking about boxing, Claressa Shields has spent weeks getting into public arguments, responding to radio hosts, sharing AI-generated pregnancy images, and repeatedly bringing Papoose into interviews and podcasts. She keeps putting his name into the conversation, so it's no surprise that Papoose eventually becomes part of the headline. Then suddenly the Breakfast Club stepped in on live radio and appeared to defend her, taking the whole situation to another level. Charlemagne, DJ Envy, and Jess Hilarious were all sitting there while critics accused them of ignoring what happened right in front of everyone. Instead of focusing on Claressa calling a radio host Miss Piggy, the controversy surrounding her relationship with Papoose, or the heated interview with Shankika, the conversation appeared to shift toward defending Claressa and criticizing the interviewer. To critics, that wasn't simply an opinion. It looked like an effort to protect Claressa from accountability. And that's why the segment has sparked so much backlash, with people questioning whether the Breakfast Club was reporting the story or acting like a shield for one side of it. And today, we're breaking down exactly how critics believe the Breakfast Club mishandled this entire situation, starting with Claressa Shields, who sits at the center of the controversy. The situation began when Shankika, the radio host involved in the viral interview, asked Claressa a straightforward question about her relationship with Papoose, who is still legally married to another woman. Instead of giving a calm, direct response, Claressa's reaction quickly became the focus of the conversation. And that moment set off everything that followed. Claressa Shields didn't respond like a professional who was prepared for a difficult media question. Instead, she became heated and called Shankika Miss Piggy, which many viewers interpreted as a body-shaming insult made during a public interview. She then criticized Shankika for being distasteful, even though the original question was about her relationship with Papoose, who remains legally married to another woman. That response shifted the focus away from the question itself and onto Claressa's reaction, which is why the controversy continued to grow. And then the Breakfast Club made the situation even more controversial. After having Claressa Shields on the show numerous times, the hosts appeared to defend her response instead of challenging it or asking follow-up questions. Charlemagne was the first to weigh in, saying he enjoyed the interview and believed Claressa gave a strong response to Shankika's question. But that raises an obvious question. How does calling a woman Miss Piggy become a great answer to a legitimate question? That's exactly why so many people have been criticizing the segment and questioning the way the hosts handled it. Since when is stumbling through a complicated explanation about titles and marriage considered a great answer? Critics argue that Claressa never actually addressed the central question about being publicly involved with a man who remains legally married. Across interviews, podcasts, and radio appearances, she has faced repeated questions about the relationship, yet the issue continues without a clear explanation that satisfies everyone. And that makes Charlemagne's reaction even more surprising to critics, especially because the Breakfast Club has built much of its reputation around asking public figures difficult questions and holding them accountable. The irony is that Charlemagne has built his reputation on asking young rappers, politicians, athletes, and executives uncomfortable follow-up questions when their answers don't add up. Yet here, critics argue he accepted Claressa's response as a great answer without pushing further. To those watching, that looked less like accountability and more like protecting a familiar guest from criticism. Whatever the intention was, the segment has left plenty of people questioning whether the Breakfast Club applied the same standards here that it applies to everyone else. DJ Envy also weighed in, saying he was frustrated that the conversation had shifted away from Claressa's upcoming fight. But that raises another question. Why wouldn't people discuss her personal life when she continues bringing it into interviews and public conversations? And as for the fight itself, critics argue that the matchup hasn't generated the same excitement as a major championship bout. Kaye Scott isn't widely viewed as a top-ranked opponent, so some fans are naturally more interested in the controversy surrounding Claressa than in the matchup itself. When Claressa Shields faced major names like Savannah Marshall, the matchup itself dominated the conversation. The same happened when she was linked to fighters such as Laila Ali, Chris Cyborg, Hannah Gabriels, and Michaela Mayer. But this upcoming fight hasn't generated that same level of attention, partly because many casual fans aren't familiar with Kaye Scott. Critics argue that Claressa's own choices and the surrounding personal drama have made the matchup even harder to sell. So instead of blaming the media for discussing the controversy, the argument is the fight simply hasn't created enough excitement on its own. Then Jess Hilarious offered a noticeably different perspective. She pointed out that people have heard far more about Claressa's previous fights than they have about this upcoming matchup, arguing that the surrounding drama has started to overshadow her boxing career. She also suggested that the papoose situation has dominated conversations about Claressa for a long time. That point resonated with viewers because it addressed something many people have already noticed. The personal controversy is often getting more attention than the actual fights. Credit to Jess for saying what others on the panel seemed reluctant to admit. But then the conversation took another turn when Charlemagne suggested that Shankika should have confronted Claressa with her follow-up comments directly in the studio at the time. Critics argue that this misunderstands how interviews and media scrums actually work. The interviewer's job is to ask the questions, give the guest room to respond, and follow up when necessary, not turn the entire segment into a personal confrontation. The focus should remain on getting answers from the guests, not creating another spectacle around the interviewer. So here's why that criticism of Shankika doesn't really hold up. In a group interview with several hosts, the interviewer can't turn the entire segment into a personal argument with the guest. You ask your question, allow the guest to respond, follow up when appropriate, and then give the other hosts their opportunity. Otherwise, the interview becomes centered around the interviewer instead of the guest and takes airtime away from everyone else. That's exactly what Shankika appeared to do. She asked the question, Claressa reacted strongly, and Shankika maintained her composure. She later discussed her perspective in separate interviews where she had more room to explain herself. That's a normal part of media work, not a failure to confront the guest. And that's where this entire controversy lands. The Breakfast Club's comments are now part of the public record, and people will continue debating whether the hosts handled the situation fairly. So tell me what you think. Is Claressa able to move past this? Does Charlemagne owe Shankika an apology? And will the Kaye Scott fight actually draw the audience people expect? Drop your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next breakdown covering the Papoose divorce timeline and the latest Remy Ma developments. Until then, keep watching, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next round.